Welcome to the Certificate in Basic Animal Care Science. I'm Liv McBride and let's see what's coming up in the show.
This week, we hop into the kitchen to prepare some rather unusual dishes. Alyssa teaches us all about enriching New Zealand's notoriously cheeky birds. We sit down with Tara to discuss some of Arana's successful breeding stories. And we learn all about caring for a gecko and how your childhood may have affected these wee guys. But first, we take on the natives.
We have a huge range of New Zealand fauna, ranging right from the well-known alpine parrots like the kea, right through into your smaller passerines like common birds such as bellbird or the awesome North Island saddleback. We also have geckos and skinks, tuatara, wading birds, waterfowl species. Really, it's a full spectrum. When I first started at Arana, I set myself some goals, and one of them was to breed a kiwi. And that was one of the biggest buzzes in my life, was the first kiwi chick that I had a part in helping bring into this world. And the other one would have been breeding mohua, which are a small endemic forest passerine. And yeah, to date, Arana Wildlife Park is the only place in the world that's ever bred that species. And you know, I was head of the project at the time, so that was an incredible thing to be a part of. Working with native animals is all about teamwork. It's not about standing alone and saying, look, I'm the best. It's about working with Auckland Zoo, Wellington Zoo, DOC, Forest and Bird, ECAN, Landcare Research, the City Council, people that are doing forest restoration work, predator trapping. It's all about being a part of a bigger team, because as individuals we can make a small difference, but working together, sharing information, driving each other's passion, we can achieve a heck of a lot more. By far the most important role for any modern zoo is advocacy and education. People come and visit a place like this mainly for selfish reasons, such as entertainment. Us zookeepers would like to believe that people come here because they are passionate about conservation, but that's just really not the truth. So when these people are here and they walk into a beautiful aviary space like this, just to be entertained, yet they get to meet something really, really special and learn a bit about it and come in very, very close contact with it. They then leave the park having felt they've made a connection with wildlife. And people that make a connection then go on to do good things, whether it's not throw their cigarette butt out the window, or to change the washer in that dripping tap, or to wash the bottom of their boat after they've been in a river before they go to a new river so that they don't spread didimo. Once people are empowered and feel a part of something and connected, they make a positive difference. If we can't get to them and make that connection, what do they care what happens in the environment around them? If they've never seen a North Island saddleback, are they going to miss it when it's gone? I don't think so. But if they can meet it here, go, wow, awesome, didn't know that existed, they're going to try to make sure that they can keep them around forever. One of the coolest species I've ever had the pleasure to work with are saddleback, or particularly North Island saddleback. They're a really gregarious little bird. They have very little fear. They're also reasonably easy to look after, which is a bit of a bonus, and have an interesting call and social activities and behaviours. And today's been a very, very special day for us at Arana, because what was the only male saddleback in captivity for the last 8 years has just got himself a girlfriend. So it's all love in the walk through aviary today, with a somewhat desperate young male, or older male as he is, finding a young love. So it's really great for us as zookeepers to see Bob is his name, finally having a partner, and it's great for several reasons. One of them is that he's happy, he's got a girlfriend, but he's showing so many more of his natural behaviours today, courtship feeding, courtship displays. He will now help find a nest site and things like this. He's actually fulfilling what he's put on this earth to do. He's not just supposed to be here to be pretty for you and I to look at. He's got more of a reason to life, and that is to breed and reproduce his number, basically. So currently there are only 3 saddleback in captivity in the world, and they're all here at Arana. And our great hope is that Bob and his new woman, Koru, will breed successfully and hopefully even provide a young female offspring to go with the other young male that we have in a different enclosure. And between them we may be able to reactivate a breeding or captive breeding program for the species, because sadly with North Island saddleback in the wild you can only really see them on offshore islands, so it's a bit about hopes to increase their numbers a bit and at least give people a chance to see them in a captive situation so they grow to love and appreciate them.
We've come into an environment like this to talk a bit about the success of the breeding programs in the native section. Tell me about the success of the blue duck.
Well, our blue duck or Fio have been fantastic breeders for us. The pair that we have at the moment were established in roughly 2002, and in the past 5 seasons they've produced 23 ducklings for release to the wild. So all of those animals have been released in Mount Egmont National Park on Mount Taranaki, and what also makes us feel so good about the success of it is those ducks have gone on to find mates and breed in the wild. So that is true success. It may be one thing breeding the animal and introducing it back to the wild, but how it copes, and then if it behaves naturally and goes on to reproduce in that wild habitat is really the proof of the pudding.
How do you know that the program is working in the wild? What do you do to monitor that?
Well, with the Fio program, every individual that is released has actually a radio transmitter on them. It's a little backpack on a harness, and those animals are tracked regularly, initially daily, and as they settle into their wild environment they'll track them less and less often, so that they're able to tell how the birds are doing in the wild. They can tell if an animal's died because the blip doesn't move anymore, so they can go and retrieve a body and find out why it died, whether it was killed by a stoat or an accidental death, or it was shot or hit by a car, or starved, or any of those things that could happen.
What classes an animal or a species as endangered? How long does it take for a process of starting to do the research to going, okay, we need to do something about this?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer because many factors come into play when you consider an animal as being endangered. For example, some animals have limited range to start with, like the Antipodes Island parakeet. They're restricted to one little island. So although they're secure on that island at the present time, should one pregnant female rat get to that island, that population of birds will be decimated, and as they're in no other place in the world, they're very, very vulnerable to introduce predators should they reach that island. So a lot of it depends on the biology of the species. Some species don't reproduce very quickly, so even though there may be more of them around, the fact that they don't reproduce very fast means that they're vulnerable for that reason. Some are vulnerable because of their habitat. Although there may be good numbers at the moment with a species, they're in a habitat that's been modified, and that will affect numbers. But a lot of it comes down to how many are left, and when you have like kakapo, there's only about 86 of those individuals left. Take 250. Black stilt, you're looking at about 100 birds. You know, these are critically endangered animals. whereas your Theo, there are about 3,000 of those left. However, it's their habitat you worry about. They can only live on the fast-running mountain streams. So they're an animal that we can't breed and put on an offshore island to preserve them. We have to preserve them in their natural habitat, which is the mountains.
And what about the blue duck? How's that going in terms of an end to the program?
No, in trouble, deep trouble at the moment, and still reducing in numbers. They're a species that is really vulnerable to predation as well as habitat modification. So basically they're getting wiped out. What happens with them is they don't have a real predator response, so when a stoat comes along, the female duck doesn't leave the nest, she stays on the eggs, and so normally she will get killed as well as her eggs eaten or ducklings killed. So not only are you losing the young, you're losing the reproductive females, and what you end up with is populations of males only, and that's really you're in a bad situation. Probably imagine they're not going to be producing any offspring. But it's not just with blue duck, that's happening with mohua, kaka. A lot of our species are hole nesting birds or burrow nesting birds. So that basically means instead of a nest like a sparrow makes, a little cup that sits in a tree branch, they make that same little cup or nest in a hollow. Okay, so what happens is stoat, cat, rat or whatever enters the hollow of the nest, and the female is trapped and she cannot leave the nest. So therefore, once again, you lose the female as well as the young.
And once the bird has, once they've chosen each other and they've done as animals do.
Copulated.
Yes.
Yeah.
How do you tell a good egg from a empty egg?
Okay, well, a lot of the time we just leave it alone, because the birds do their own job, and often a female bird will remove an egg that's died or an egg that's not fertile from the clutch. She'll push it out of the nest. But the pateki or brown teal, they're fantastic. They do not need artificial incubation whatsoever, and in fact the male teaches them a lot. Out of all the duck species in the world, the male pateki has the most input with his ducklings. They're quite an interesting species, and they do really well, and we don't do artificial incubation with them. However, should there be a crisis, say the female dies partway through incubation, or for some reason gets an incredible fright and is scared off the nest and won't go back on, we would then take those eggs and incubate them. Another program we're involved with is kiwi breeding, and kiwi eggs are normally harvested quite early in incubation, any time after about 10-15 days, and you have a greater likelihood of hatching a kiwi if you do it in an artificial incubator in captivity than leaving it under the male.
Terry, you mentioned the brown teal. What's going on with their breed for release?
Well, that is a really, really successful captive breeding and breed for release program. Arana's been involved with that program for 3 years, in which time I believe we've bred 49 ducklings for release, or roughly that amount. And back when we became involved in the program, there was about 1,000 of these birds left in the wild. They were really, really in crisis. But through the efforts of captive breeding and also the efforts of predator control in the wild and creating mainland islands and then releasing these captive bred birds to these areas, they've been able to build up the population to roughly 1,400 birds in the last 3 or 4 years.
Right, Alyssa, well, we're in with the two older retired gentlemen's club members of the Kia family. Tell me what's different between these guys, besides age, to the guys over there.
Besides age, we've got the different personalities and the fact that both of these guys have had quite big health issues in the past. They've both had very serious and very close calls with health issues, and they've ended up having to live together because they needed a mellower lifestyle, and living with the equivalent to kind of early 20s when you're kind of like a 50 to 60 year old kind of older gentleman. It's not that fun, and they just needed something that was a little bit calmer and we still have a dominant bird and the submissive bird, but it's not as intense as the younger guys are.
Now, getting them to come up on the perches here, what's that doing for them?
It's giving them a bit of focus, something to think about, and it also means that it's getting their little brains to work. They remember, they know as soon as they're on these perches why they're here and what I want from them, and I don't have to do a lot to get what I need out of them.
And when a kea comes into captivity, how long does it take them to get to this stage where he'll flap his wings on command?
Probably not that long, because they are very gregarious birds. They're really out there, they're like in your face even in the wild. I've had encounters with wild ones where they've come marching right up and grabbed my pants and shaking them and gone, look at me. The main thing is just getting that bond with them, and also one of the biggest things I did when I was training them was think about what they do naturally and then reward them when they were doing it. So this guy here is probably the best one at showing off the wings, and the main reason we picked that was because he's older and he's calm, so he's less likely to just flap, and it means that when we need to show people the colours of their wings, the fact that on the back of his wings there are really, really blue.
Oh, indeed.
And the fact that the front is really, really orange, so if they're just sitting like he is now, people don't get to see that, and people come along and go, oh, they're boring, they're just green.
What is the point on when they're sitting just like this? It's quite a natural colour, I suppose, a nice birdy green, and when they spread out, they've got the orange and the blue.
That is, they use it to signal to each other, to tell each other where they are, because they do travel quite big distances in the wild, and they are, the area which they hang around in the wild is kind of grey and a bit of green, and they blend in really, really well. So when they're up really high in the air and there's one down the bottom and they're trying to say, oh, I'm up here, it's kind of got to have something to make you stand out. And they also, these guys do display when they're trying to show off to each other or say, oh, I'm beautiful, look at me, I've got my pretty feathers.
How much of your knowledge here is based on what you've learnt before coming here and what's actually the hands-on side?
Most of it would be hands-on. I did study captive animal management, which has definitely helped get my get the grasp of what to expect, what I was going to kind of encounter, but actually being there and seeing it is quite different. And I have seen a lot of stuff and it definitely has helped kind of mould my knowledge, and I'm still learning. I've been doing this for a while now, but I keep learning. You keep hearing new noises, seeing new behaviour, and it's really nice when we get a new species as well, because then it's a whole nother animal to learn.
And what about the environment that they're in right now? How close is this to their natural habitat?
It's similar, but definitely not like they have. Where they come from, they have a lot of rocks and a lot of small bushes. They don't have the big leafy bushes like we have in here. And that means that they don't get to live in the same environment as they would, but hopefully they're getting a walk through aviary, which will mean that they can have a much better environment that they currently live in.
So does captivity change their personality much?
I think it makes them, they probably get even more outgoing. They start to, they know that in this situation humans can be trusted, and generally we're seen as the food bringers, because that's what we do. We come in, clean up their mess, and then we give them their food.
Here at the park we have such a great range of native bird species that we have to really think carefully about what we feed the animals, and there's about 6 base diets that are mixed together in different amounts for each component depending on the species. For example, we make a big bucket of fruit mix every day, and that fruit mix mainly has seasonal fruits, but it also has peas and corn and silver beet and brown rice, and of course a vitamin and mineral supplement chucked in as well. And that's the base diet for the kereroo or wood pigeon, but a small amount of fruit mix goes to nearly every other species we have as well, because some of them all take a small amount of fruit in their natural diet. Then we have an insectivore mix, which is basically a meat mix, which has ground mince, and it also has eggs and cat biscuits and bran, and another vitamin and mineral type supplement that's imported from Australia. And that's all mixed together, and that goes to anything that would normally eat meat in the wild or insects. And we have a nectar mix, which is for the nectar-eating birds. Nectar-eating birds have an interesting tongue. They have a little tongue like a paintbrush, so they dip their tongue in flowers and collect the nectar and the pollen. And so we make up a mix that contains complan, ferrex, brown sugar, honey and water for nectar eaters. Now, of course, nectar eaters are also normally partially fruit eaters and may also be insect eaters. So when you talk about a North Island saddleback, which is omnivorous, its diet consists of nectar, meat mix and fruit mix, as well as live insects every day, and a nice piece of fruit to stab at and tear hunks off as well. So you've got to look at each animal and go, right, what do you eat in the wild? How can we closely simulate that in captivity? And it's not as easy as going out and just picking native berries, because there's no way we could keep up with 100 birds doing that every day. However, we're able to create these simulated diets out of foods that you and I eat, but we also supplement those diets with natural foods as well. So we'll go and collect branches of trees that are in flower or berries at this present time. November's always a really cool time for the nectar eaters, because we'll go and cut flax flowers for them, and all the bellbirds and tuis and saddleback, all, you know, they're there all day licking the nectar out of these flax flowers, and they'd quite enjoy that. When you're formulating a diet for any native species, the first thing that you do is you ask around anybody that has kept that species before. Oftentimes species are members of breeding programs, so somebody has already put the research in and there will be a recommended diet for you to follow. But the second thing you do, or it actually depends, if it's a new species that's never been kept in captivity before, you would do research onto what they ate in the wild and then try to mimic that as closely as you could.
Okay, what have you got for us today, Tara?
I've got a little friend here who is a rough gecko. Rough gecko are a really special South Island species. They're found in the Nelson Marlborough area, and they're called the rough gecko because of the enlarged scales that you can see along their back and on their head.
They look like moss.
They do, and it's fantastic you notice that, because these animals, their only method of self-preservation against predators is to become invisible. So basically they're green because they hang out in the trees, and of course there's moss and lichen grows on tree trunks and stuff like that. So if this little guy was in a tree and he wasn't moving, you would probably never ever see the animal. It's only when they actually move, or you've got a real feel for it, a lot of experience looking for geckos in the wild, that you'd actually find this animal.
Now his tail is pretty much the size of his body. What's going on there?
Okay, now they have a prehensile tail. All of your green geckos can use their tails really, really well. Prehensile is a Latin word which means used like a hand. So it basically means he's got five appendages at which he can grip with.
What is the purpose of the lizard house or the reptile house at Arana Park?
Well, the main reason is so that people can see the beauty and diversity of New Zealand's wildlife. We didn't have mammals naturally, of course, except for a bat, and we were the land of birds, reptiles and insects. So these little creatures have a really special place in our ecosystem. But the saddest thing that I find is that a lot of New Zealanders don't even realise that these creatures exist.
We've been with the Kias, and now they're obviously very intelligent and they need a lot of stimulation. Do these wee guys need that kind of stimulation?
It's hard to know how intelligent they are and to gauge that, but the general rule of thumb is all animals need stimulation. So enrich them all, big or small. It doesn't matter if they're the silliest dumbest looking animal you've ever seen, you've still ethically need to go to an effort to enrich their lives, otherwise they're just sitting in a cage. Foods, changing around the furniture for them, and when we say furniture we mean the logs and the mosses and things like that, because everything in a gecko enclosure is in miniature.
And what else do we have in the reptile house?
Well, we have several species of green gecko. I just chose this guy because the rough geckos are one of my favourite, very, very unusual animal. But we also have Wellington green, Northland green and Auckland green geckos in there. We have several species of brown type geckos as well. Now they're also a New Zealand native, but the brown type of geckos tend to live more on the bark of trees or on the ground in the leaf litter and under rocks and things, whereas the green guys live up in the trees and the leaves.
Breeding's a hot topic for a show like this.
Yep.
How do you get these guys to do their thing?
New Zealand geckos, they're used to cold winters. They need a cold winter to bring them into breeding condition the next year. So if you, as a captive animal, this animal's very active in hot weather, but in winter they can sit there for days and days on end not moving because it's too cold. They're a cold-blooded creature. You have to replicate that. We can't just have them on display under lights so they're busy 12 months a year. We have to let them cool down. And they're very slow breeders, our New Zealand reptiles. Geckos, or most geckos, except for some of the larger types, normally only have 1 or 2 young a year, and the females are gravid, which means pregnant, for about 11 months. So it all takes a very, very long time and doesn't reproduce much. So you can imagine if one cat was in the bush and ate 10 geckos a day, how quickly that would devastate a population, because they only reproduce their own number and one more annually if they're lucky.
So how much research has gone into this kind of thing?
Oh, heaps and heaps over the years. Native geckos have been kept in captivity mainly by private holders and enthusiasts for many, many years, and a lot has been learnt through trial and error. Only just now we're really looking into our reptile species and how we can conserve them. The unfortunate thing in New Zealand is so many of our native species are in trouble, either threatened or in serious decline, that there is so much research to be done on so many species that often some little inconspicuous animals come last, and I think that's them. You know, we're just getting on to reptiles now. We've done a lot on kiwi, takahe, kakapo, all the things that are bigger and in serious trouble, while these guys are slowly being disappearing from under our noses, and we haven't known why or had time to look into it.
That's another show for this week. If you'd like any more information on the Certificate in Basic Animal Care Science, call our team on 0800 SIT to learn. See what's coming up in next week's show.
Next week, animal care gets all cute and cuddly. We get up to some monkey business with the primates, hang around for a feed with the lemurs, and Graham fills us in on why you don't want to get in the way of these guys and their food.